My rich family disowned me. Then I saved their company from ruin. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I hadn't set foot in my family's headquarters in 5 years. Not since the day they told me I was no longer one of them. Not since the boardroom scene that burned itself into my memory. My father's cold voice reading out the official vote, my mother avoiding my eyes, and my older brother Ethan smirking like he'd just won a game. But this morning, I walked back into that same boardroom. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, just like before. The portraits of our ancestors stared down at me from the walls, all smug in their gilded frames. Around the table, the same faces, my parents, Ethan, the board members, all looking at me like I was a ghost they'd hoped never to see again. "Thank you for coming," my father said stiffly, as if the words tasted bitter. I didn't sit. You didn't give me much of a choice. It was Ethan who broke first. "We're in trouble," he said, his voice tight. "The company's bleeding money. Our investors are panicking. We need your help." The irony was almost too much to swallow. 5 years ago, they'd cut me off over a deal I refused to sign, a deal that would have sold off part of the company to a corrupt partner. Ethan had accused me of sabotage in front of the entire board. I'd left that day with nothing but my pride, moving into a one-bedroom apartment and building my own life from scratch. And now, here they were, asking for the very skills they'd once called a liability. I let the silence hang, watching them squirm. My mother shifted in her chair. My father's jaw clenched. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. "Finally," I said, "before we talk about saving your company, let's be clear about one thing. I haven't forgotten what you did to me." My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'll hear your proposal, but my terms will be mine alone." For the first time since I walked in, I saw something flicker across Ethan's face. Not annoyance, not contempt, fear. The day they disowned me didn't start with a fight. It started with champagne. I remember standing in the main hall of our family's estate, sunlight streaming through the crystal chandelier, the air thick with the scent of roses and fresh pastries. It was supposed to be a celebration, the final signing of a massive merger deal. Cameras were set up. The press was waiting outside. Ethan had his arm slung casually around my father's shoulder, both of them wearing the kind of smiles that meant the decision was already made. I was supposed to sign the documents as a co-owner, sealing the deal and proving my loyalty to the family. Only one problem: I'd done my homework. The partner they were merging with, a conglomerate called Norvale Holdings, wasn't just corrupt. They were laundering money through shell companies, and 3 of their executives were under quiet investigation. I'd found the reports, the court filings, even an internal whistleblower email. When I confronted my father in his study the night before, he dismissed it. "Business is business. Don't be naive." So when the pen was placed in my hand in front of everyone, I didn't sign. I slid the document back across the table. "I won't put my name on a deal that's criminal." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's eyes darted to the guests, embarrassed. My father's face hardened into stone. Ethan leaned in with a look of theatrical disappointment. "She's been trying to sabotage us for months," he said to the board. "I warned you she'd turn on us." I tried to speak, but Ethan already had the narrative locked. He accused me of leaking confidential files, of plotting to sell my shares to a rival. None of it was true, but the whispers started immediately. Within an hour, the vote was called. My family, the board, everyone I'd grown up with, they voted me out. My name was removed from the company registry before I even left the building. I remember standing outside the gates that night, the mansion glowing in the distance, holding nothing but my phone and the keys to a car I'd later have to sell. That was the night I stopped being one of them. But as I sat across from them in that boardroom 5 years later, I realized something. The day they erased me was also the day I started building the version of myself who could destroy them or save them. The first year after they cut me off was brutal. I went from a life where my clothes were custom-tailored in Milan to counting coins at a dingy grocery store checkout, wondering if I could afford pasta and milk. My apartment was a cramped, peeling one-bedroom above a laundromat, where the walls shook every time someone turned on the dryers. I sold my car, most of my jewelry, even the watch my grandfather gave me. But there was something strangely liberating about being invisible. No paparazzi, no family name to protect, no one to answer to but myself. I took a job at a small logistics startup, The kind of scrappy operation my family would have mocked. It was run out of a converted warehouse, the office furniture mismatched and secondhand. But they trusted me. They listened when I spoke. They didn't care who my father was. And I learned, really learned, how a business works from the ground up, how to balance a budget when every cent matters, how to negotiate with suppliers who didn't trust you yet, how to handle crises without throwing money at the problem until it went away. By year 3, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I had my own consultancy, a small but growing client base, and a reputation for fixing problems no one else could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Still, I couldn't escape the occasional headline about the family. Ethan grinning in some glossy magazine spread. My parents hosting galas. The company boasting record growth. I'd tell myself I didn't care, but every headline was a needle. Then, one morning, everything shifted. I woke up to an email from an old contact at the company, a quiet, loyal accountant who'd once slipped me insider reports when I was being framed. The subject line read, "They're falling apart." Attached was a series of financial statements. Red ink everywhere. Declining profits. Investor pullouts. And one ominous note in her message. "If they don't fix this in 6 months, it's over. They're going to call you." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. And for the first time in years, I felt the power shift. It came sooner than I expected. I was in the middle of a client meeting, discussing supply chain redundancies, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Mother. For a moment, I just stared at it, letting it ring. She hadn't called me once in 5 years. Not for my birthday. Not when I was sick with pneumonia. Not when I lost my apartment in a storm and had to sleep on a friend's couch. And now, suddenly, she remembered I existed. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and answered with a flat, "What do you want?" Her voice was calm, measured, too measured. "Your father and I need to speak with you. It's important." "The company." "The company?" I cut in, letting the venom slip. "The one you kicked me out of? Or the one you let Ethan frame me for betraying?" A pause. "Things have changed," she said quietly. "We'd like you to come to the headquarters. Tomorrow morning." There it was. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just business. I almost laughed. "You've got to be desperate if you're calling me." She didn't deny it. "We are." I hung up without saying yes or no. But that night, as I sat in my apartment with the city lights glowing through the window, I thought about the look on Ethan's face when I walked into that boardroom. That flicker of fear. It was tempting, dangerously tempting, to watch them burn from the sidelines. To let the empire they'd chosen over me collapse. But there was another thought I couldn't shake. If I stepped in now, I wouldn't just be saving them. I'd be setting the stage to rewrite the story, my story. And this time, I'd be the one holding the pen. The next morning, I dressed deliberately. Not in the kind of luxury my family used to dictate. No tailored skirt suits or jewelry worth more than some people's homes. Instead, I chose a sleek black blazer, crisp white blouse, dark jeans, and a pair of clean but understated heels. Powerful enough to command attention, casual enough to show them I didn't need their world anymore. When I pulled up to the headquarters, the building loomed like a glass fortress against the skyline. The security guard at the front desk blinked when I gave my name. He hesitated, then picked up the phone. "They're expecting you," he said finally, sliding a visitor badge across the counter. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent but heavy. Each floor I passed felt like a year I'd been gone. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the same marble lobby where Ethan once shook my hand for the cameras before gutting me in the boardroom. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when she saw me, but she quickly masked it. "They're in the conference room." Inside, the entire leadership team sat around the long table. My father at the head, Ethan to his right, my mother to his left. The rest of the board members, some familiar, some new, shifted in their seats as I walked in. "Thank you for coming," my father said, his voice like stone. "I didn't say I came to help," I replied, pulling out the chair at the far end of the table. Ethan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. He slid a folder toward me. "You'll want to see this." Inside were pages of disaster. Missed payments, terminated contracts, shareholder lawsuits, and a competitor making an aggressive takeover bid. It was worse than the accountant's email had hinted. "This is a sinking ship," I said, closing the folder. "And you want me to be your life raft." My father didn't flinch. "We want you to save the company." I leaned back, letting the tension stretch. "And what's in it for me?" Ethan opened his mouth, probably to throw some insult, but my father beat him to it. Name your price. And in that moment, I knew. I had them exactly where I wanted. I let the room sit in silence long enough for them to squirm. It was almost satisfying to watch my father's stoic mask crack, just a little, as the weight of my paws pressed in. My terms are simple, I said finally. I want my shares back. All of them. Full voting rights. My name reinstated on the board, at the top. And I let my gaze drift to Ethan. I want complete access to every financial record from the last 5 years. Ethan scoffed. That's absurd. You don't get to waltz back in here, and Ethan, my father's voice cut sharp as glass. Not a word. That surprised me. In the old days, he would have defended Ethan without hesitation. Now he just looked tired. Cornered. My mother cleared her throat. We can discuss the specifics. But time is not on our side. The takeover bid closes in less than 3 months. I smiled faintly. Then I suggest you discuss quickly. A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. They were calculating, weighing the cost of swallowing their pride against the cost of losing everything. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what if we say no? I didn't blink. Then I walk out of here, and I let this company drown. And I make sure the press knows exactly why. That landed. My father sat back, exhaling slowly. Fine, he said at last. You'll have your terms. But I expect results immediately. Good, I said, rising from my chair. Because the first thing I'm going to do is find out exactly who's been bleeding this company dry. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for the briefest moment, I saw it. That flicker of fear again. I didn't waste time. The moment the ink was dry on my reinstatement agreement, I moved into a small corner office on the top floor. Not the grand one my father used to flaunt. I wanted to keep a low profile while I worked. My first order of business was pulling the company's financial data from the past 5 years. Every invoice, every contract, every suspicious wire transfer. I hired 2 trusted analysts from my consultancy, people with no ties to my family, no reason to protect anyone in this building. Within a week, the numbers started telling a story. A dark one. Millions had been funneled into consulting contracts with shell companies. Overseas accounts that led nowhere. Massive bonuses paid out to executives right before key deals fell apart. And at the center of more than half of it, Ethan's signature. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I sat in the glow of my laptop screen, tracing another tangled set of transactions. It was almost elegant, the way he'd hidden it. Kickbacks disguised as marketing expenses. Luxury travel written off as client meetings. But there was one payment I couldn't stop staring at, a 7-figure transfer to a private investment firm I recognized. Because 5 years ago, right after I was cut out of the company, that same firm had been tied to the very merger deal I'd refused to sign. It hit me like ice water. Ethan hadn't just framed me to push me out. He'd done it so he could push that deal through and profit from it in secret. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the electric rush of leverage. This was more than proof of his corruption. This was a loaded weapon, and I was done playing nice. I didn't go to my father right away. No, that would have been reckless. If I accused Ethan without airtight proof, he'd spin it, twist it, and make me look like I was sabotaging the company all over again. Instead, I called an old contact from the press. Not one of the gossip columnists my family loved to charm, but an investigative journalist who'd made a career out of dismantling corporate corruption. We met in a quiet cafe far from downtown, the kind of place where no one cared who you were. I slid a flash drive across the table. It's not the full picture yet, but it's enough to make him sweat. The journalist glanced at the files, then looked up at me with a half smile. If this checks out, you'll have the story of the year. I don't want a story, I said, my voice low. I want leverage, and I want him scared. Back at the office, I put phase 2 into motion, a surprise internal audit. No warning, no schedule, just my analysts swarming through departments with requests for every scrap of documentation. I made sure Ethan's division was first. 2 days in, I caught him in the hallway. His usual smugness was replaced with a clipped tone. You're making people nervous. Good, I replied, walking past him. That night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and a distorted voice came through the line. You're digging in the wrong places, it said. If you know what's good for you, you'll stop. I froze. It wasn't Ethan. This voice was deeper, colder. Someone else was involved. And if they were calling me, it meant I was getting dangerously close to the truth. The call replayed in my mind all night. Not just the words, but the calm, almost bored tone, like they weren't threatening me out of panic, but because they could. By morning, I decided to trace the number. It was a burner, of course, registered under a fake name and routed through multiple forwarding services. Whoever this was, they knew exactly how to hide. But here's the thing about people who hide. They still leave footprints. Cross-referencing the time of the call with building access logs revealed something odd. One of the senior board members, Leonard Price, had left the office minutes before the call was made from an area of the city known for private broker offices. Leonard was old money, a fixture in my parents' social circle, and one of Ethan's loudest defenders during my disownment. I kept this to myself and continued the audit, but now I paid extra attention to Leonard's involvement in company deals. His name was all over the paperwork tied to the shady consulting firms funneling cash offshore. Ethan might have been skimming money, but Leonard? Leonard was the architect. Later that week, during a late-night review, I found something explosive, a draft agreement for the company to sell one of its most profitable divisions to a shell corporation controlled by Leonard's son. The sale would have gutted the company's future revenue and conveniently lined Leonard's pockets before the takeover bid hit. That was the moment I realized Ethan wasn't the mastermind. He was just the weapon, and Leonard Price was the hand pulling the trigger. If Leonard was the real puppeteer, I couldn't just expose him outright. Not yet. The man had decades of connections, political leverage, and enough lawyers on retainer to tie me up in court for years. I needed him to hang himself in plain sight. So, I crafted bait. During the next board meeting, I casually mentioned a potential investor I'd been in talks with, an international firm with deep pockets and an interest in acquiring niche divisions like ours. I made it sound like I was hesitant, that I didn't trust them fully, but that the deal could solve our liquidity crisis. Leonard's eyes lit up just enough for me to notice. He leaned forward, all polite curiosity. And what division would they be interested in acquiring? I smirked inwardly. Hook set. The logistics branch, I said, naming the same division he'd already been trying to sell to his son's shell company. Over the next week, I leaked small, carefully crafted bits of confidential information through back channels I knew would get back to Leonard. Fake meeting notes, drafts of proposed terms, just enough to make him believe he could swoop in, intercept the deal, and profit like he always did. And sure enough, one night, my analyst pinged me. Leonard had been in contact with our investor. Not directly, of course, but through a proxy. They were trying to negotiate a side deal. The final step was recording proof. I arranged a fake dinner with the investor's representative, an actor friend of mine, and made sure Leonard got an invite. Hidden microphones, discreet cameras, the whole setup. The moment Leonard started outlining how to structure the sale to hide profits offshore, I knew I had him. But the real shock? Halfway through the conversation, he mentioned Ethan, not just as a participant, but as the one who'd originally brought the idea to him. I should have been ready for it, but hearing Leonard casually credit Ethan still knocked the air out of me. For years, I'd believed Ethan was just a greedy opportunist riding my family's privilege. But now, it was clear. He'd been in deep from the very start. The dinner ended with Leonard shaking hands with our investor, blissfully unaware that every word had been recorded. I left the restaurant before anyone could see me, the tiny recorder in my pocket feeling heavier than gold. Back at my apartment, I played the audio again. Leonard's voice was clear as crystal, detailing kickbacks, offshore accounts, and the exact timing of the division's quiet sale. Then, Ethan's name. Twice. First, as the originator of the plan. Second, as the one who would smooth it over with the family if needed. It was the missing puzzle piece. Ethan hadn't just engineered my removal to push through his own petty scheme. He'd done it as part of a much larger conspiracy with Leonard, one that had been bleeding the company dry for years. The rage that hit me was cold, not fiery. Controlled. This wasn't just about payback anymore. This was about ending them both. I sent the recordings to my journalist contact, with strict instructions: do nothing yet. I'll tell you when. Because if I played this right, I could take Leonard off the board, cripple Ethan's credibility, and make sure my family's company was untouchable to outside predators, all in one move. But first, I had to make them think they were still winning. The next few weeks were a masterclass in pretending. I smiled at Ethan in the halls, nodded politely to Leonard in meetings, and played the dutiful team player. All the while, I watched them circle like vultures, convinced I was nothing more than a pawn they could still outmaneuver. I let them think the logistics branch deal was moving forward. Fed them just enough fake updates to keep their greed warm and ready. Behind the scenes, I worked with my analysts to secure the company's vulnerable assets, quietly shifting funds and locking down contracts so no real damage could be done if they tried to move early. One night, Ethan invited me for a drink to bury the hatchet. The bar was sleek, dimly lit, the kind of place where old money went to whisper in corners. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "I never wanted things to get so ugly between us. It's just business, right?" I forced a laugh. "Right, just business." But as he talked, I noticed something, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Maybe he'd caught wind that Leonard wasn't telling him everything. Maybe he suspected I knew more than I let on. Either way, it was a crack I could widen. "I've been thinking," I said, leaning in slightly. "When the division sells, there's going to be a lot of cash moving around. Maybe you and I should make sure some of it lands in the right place for us." Ethan's smirk returned, slow and self-satisfied. "Now you're talking." The hook was in. What he didn't know was that our private conversation was being recorded too, this time, in a way that would tie him directly to Leonard's scheme. All I had to do now was wait for them to step into the spotlight. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they'd bury the evidence. Too late, and the sale might actually go through. I waited until Leonard and Ethan scheduled their final meeting with the board to approve the logistics branch sale. The night before, I slipped a sealed envelope under each board member's office door. Inside was a flash drive labeled simply, "For your protection." On it, the full recordings, Leonard outlining the offshore scheme, Ethan agreeing to skim profits, and both of them discussing how to manipulate the family if anyone objected. By the time the meeting started, you could feel the tension in the room. Half the board avoided eye contact with Leonard. The other half stared at Ethan like they were already picturing him in handcuffs. Leonard tried to launch into his usual smooth pitch, but the chairwoman interrupted. "We've all had time to review certain information," she said, her voice cold. "Before we proceed, I think Mr. Price and Mr. Ethan should explain themselves." The color drained from Leonard's face. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing around like a trapped animal. When they both denied everything, the chairwoman nodded to the IT team. A large screen lit up. My recordings played, crystal clear, echoing through the boardroom. Leonard's jaw tightened with every word. Ethan's voice cracked when he realized he'd been caught on tape. By the time the audio ended, the room was silent. Then the chairwoman spoke again. "You're both suspended pending investigation. Effective immediately." I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't the end. Men like Leonard didn't go down quietly. And Ethan? Ethan had always been at his most dangerous when cornered. For a brief moment, I thought I'd won. Leonard and Ethan were escorted out of the building, their access badges deactivated, their offices locked. The board thanked me in careful, measured tones, the kind that made it clear they were grateful, but still wary of my place in the family. But the next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone was blowing up with calls from reporters, colleagues, even old friends. Headlines were everywhere. Disowned heir stages corporate coup. Family feud erupts into public scandal. Anonymous sources claim whistleblower was after control all along. The smear campaign was fast, brutal, and coordinated. Ethan and Leonard might have lost their positions, but they still had connections, and those connections were working overtime to paint me as the villain. Within 48 hours, a leaked email appeared online, supposedly showing me discussing plans to strip assets from the company myself. It was fake, of course, but convincing enough to make people question everything. I traced the source back to a private PR firm Leonard had used before. This wasn't just an attempt to ruin me, it was a distraction. If I was busy defending myself in the court of public opinion, I wouldn't notice whatever last move they were making behind the scenes. I had to act fast. I called my journalist contact, the one who'd been sitting on the recordings. "Release everything," I told him. "Every word, every name. And make sure it drops everywhere at once." He hesitated. "Once it's out, there's no pulling it back." "That's the point," I said. "If they wanted to play this in the public arena, fine. But I was about to make sure the entire world knew exactly who the real villains were." The recordings dropped at 9 a.m. sharp. Within minutes, they were everywhere, on the front pages of financial news sites, trending on social media, dissected by analysts who couldn't believe the depth of Leonard's and Ethan's scheme. It wasn't just the boardroom conversation anymore. I'd included the bar recording with Ethan, the fake investor dinner, and even the subtle threats I'd received. Every lie, every smirk, every arrogant word was now public property. The reaction was swift. Leonard's remaining allies abandoned him overnight, his political connections suddenly too busy to comment. Ethan was hounded by reporters, cameras catching him shoving microphones away as he tried to leave his apartment. The company's legal team filed official complaints with law enforcement, and the government announced a full investigation. And the best part? For the first time in my life, my family looked at me not as the embarrassment they'd cut out, but as the only reason their empire was still standing. My father called that night, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You saved us," he said. Not quite an apology, but close enough to make me pause. The board offered me a permanent executive position. I accepted, not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I'd earned it on my own terms. As for Leonard and Ethan, they were finished. Bank accounts frozen, reputations shredded, invitations to every exclusive room revoked. I didn't have to lift another finger. Fate had finally caught up. Still, I knew I'd carry the scars of this war for a long time. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any corporate ambush. But as I sat in my new office, overlooking the city skyline, I realized something. I wasn't just the disowned heir anymore. I was the one who survived. And in this family, that's the only title that matters.